Ladies and gentlemen, we've got big updates regarding the current standing the United States has when it comes to the European powers in terms of military agreements. You had Elon Musk responding to someone saying that, yes, the United States should leave NATO and the United Nations. There's been questions even back in 2018, 2019 during Trump's first term. He was not happy with NATO. If you remember that whole saga, he really wanted to get all of the country's military spending at least up to the 2% that was required, 2% on military per GDP. According to NATO, a lot of the countries were below that, and it was seen by the smaller countries within NATO as a hindrance and something they didn't need to do because the United States made up such a large percentage of NATO. But Trump said, no, you're skimming off of us. You need to get your budget up. And then Trump said, that's a victory. That's all I was trying to do. Well, here, fast forward now, it's clear the United States and the top European powers are at odds when it comes to Russia's current standing in the world and their military power and how scary they actually are. And so it's not just Elon Musk, it's also Donald Trump. Could Trump unilaterally leave NATO? It really comes down to an interpretation of the Article 13 in NATO. That's how the United States would leave it. I believe Article 13 says the nation that leaves NATO must inform the U.S. For us, it would just be informing ourselves that we would leave NATO. It's like a year process of leaving NATO. And so there is a lot to factor in when it comes to NATO, that military agreement. Certainly, I've discussed it. The idea of NATO existing in 2025, it kind of seems like a prehistoric agreement when you talk about when it was put into place right after World War II. Very threatened by the Soviet Union and their rise in the amount of Eastern European Soviet states that they did have and their overall influence after World War II, in which they were part of the Allies and they won there against Nazi Germany, and the United States defeated Japan, along with the Normandy landings, helping. Sure, Germany fighting a war on two fronts was certainly not good for them, but the point of it is the Soviet Union had serious influence. They controlled a lot more territory than they do now. The fall of the Soviet Union, many countries became independent. And the idea is, does it make sense for the United States to tether themselves to an Article 5 to where, especially with all of the countries involved in NATO now, it's really, it's like two sides of the same coin. The idea of NATO being a deterrent is understandable, right? Because you've got the United States in this agreement. If you are Russia and you're looking to pick off and maybe take some European countries on the eastern side of Europe, NATO is a deterrent because you're involving the United States if Russia decides to invade one of those countries. The problem with that is it immediately escalates the war to a global conflict if Russia decided to do that. Now, you're saying it's a deterrent. That's the whole idea of NATO. And then we've got the situation with Ukraine, to where Ukraine was originally part of the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union, then they became independent, but they were still kind of a Russian puppet state. There was a very pro-Russian leader there, and then you had the revolution in 2014. They became more West, and now it's like Ukraine is split between the far eastern side and the rest of it that wants to be part of the West, and so you've got an issue right there. The whole idea of NATO, I understand, is a deterrent. We know that Biden bragged about the expansion of NATO and how far eastern it got into Ukraine with a lot of the countries. Now, I think the most recent one was Finland agreeing to join NATO. Ukraine, I think Republicans and Democrats agree it's not going to happen. There are some crazy liberals that say, oh, we want Ukraine in here. It's not feasible. But this is a complicated thing when it comes to it. Now, I do think it is possible when it comes to the United Nations. I think it's possible for Trump to leave without Congress's support. I do. I believe it's based off of interpretations, but so you can see Musk is talking about the idea of leaving it. This is something that I'm sure Trump is pondering as well. It's not just Musk, because of the dynamics of where we're at in 2025. The problem is it's very clear the United States and the European countries view Russia differently, drastically differently. At least the Republicans do. The Democrats, they're more lapdogs to Europe, and that's why the Europeans wanted Democrats in the White House. And you talk to any European, they say, we like America when they're Democrats because they're all so stupid and it's like they're neutered. But the Republicans come in, and that's what we saw with Vance and Trump. And now, I mean, we're getting so many things coming out of the Zelensky meeting where there's independent people who were like former Democrats. They're like, yeah, I admit I'm thankful for Trump. He actually stood up for the American people. With Biden, he'd be sleeping. It'd be like a corpse. It would be a morgue if Biden met with Zelensky, and he'd just be like signing a check, like sleeping, like, oh, is it 30 trillion or 40 trillion? I don't know which one it is. What are we sending over? But like Europe is very, very worried about the meeting that happened because it happened publicly, and it showed a lot of the American people that we're really not. When you look at the Ukraine situation, it was seen more of as an ungrateful thing by Zelensky, at least the way he came off to the people. And it seems like, at least from a lot of Americans read, he wants to potentially continue the war and keep the gravy train going. I don't think that's it. I think he wants assurances in terms of the U.S.'s involvement. I mean, this is very impressive what Trump is saying here. Hold on, take a look at this. U.S. leaving NATO by June 30th. People are saying, well, no, it can't happen. You need Congress. Well, it's a year. It takes a year to happen, I believe. Unless, I mean, this is the U.S. We could really, it's not American ignorance to say we could do what we want. I mean, this is just what it is. If we leave NATO, NATO is not NATO. It's just not. It's more of a European type agreement. You've got Canada involved, but yeah, it's up to around 14%. I don't know what happened. I don't think it's gonna happen by June 30th. It's only at 14%. But I'm just saying there is the idea of that. And then where was this Trump? This is what Trump said. Trump just posted this on the mineral deal. Zelensky will have no choice but to put down and accept Trump's terms. By negotiating a mineral deal, Trump ensures Americans will be involved in Ukraine's mining industry. This prevents Russia from launching an invasion because attacking Ukraine would mean endangering American lives. Trump played both sides like a master chess player. And so even as an American, Republican American, you might be saying, well, do we really want to be involved in Ukraine in terms of, you've got the mining situation. The question is, what are the assurances? Like, let's say Russia decides to be aggressive with Ukraine. I mean, is this insinuating that the United States is going to have to help Ukraine again in a meaningful way? And would they be willing to? Or is it going to be more of a European situation? But it kind of is insinuating we're going to have to help them because we have a vested interest in their mining because we're trying to get the minerals back. But to be honest, this could be the gateway to Ukraine agreeing, right? The idea is we're going to be in the region. We're going to extract whatever we need to extract. I don't know exactly what the negotiation is in terms of, well, once the United States gets all their minerals, do we get to go home? Do we still have to have security? Is it more of a European thing? I think that's what's being negotiated right now when it comes to Ukraine. But yeah, this is, you would think it's like a best of both worlds. The United States does an economic deal with Russia and gets minerals from them. They also do an economic deal with Ukraine and gets those rare earths from that area. And it also makes Ukraine feel good because the United States has an investment into the region. But again, we're talking about, on top of mining the minerals, what is the U.S. total pledge to protecting Ukraine from an invasion of Russia? A reinvasion is what it would be. And I mean, nobody really knows exactly what Russia is going to do, but we can predict if the United States has an economic situation with Russia, there would be less likely of a invasion or a reinvasion of Ukraine by Putin and the Russians. That's what I would say on that. So Trump is basically saying this is the best for both sides. We're going to have interest in Ukraine. They need to just do this. They're sitting there like, well, what if a reinvasion happens? I mean, they have no choice. They have no choice based on what's happening right now. And Europe got really scared. They scrambled. By the way, this woman was just, I don't even know what she's saying here. I'm going to play, let me see if I can find the part where this woman is just like, she is misrepresenting Americans' point. Let me see this.
Some American officials saying that, you can't possibly beat Russia. I mean, Russia is so much bigger and, you need to give in to Russia because it's not beatable, which is not true, by the way.
Yeah, and she's totally misrepresenting the point. She's talking about, she's not talking about Ukraine. She's talking about Europe. Can't be. Listen, the whole idea is right now, the current situation, Ukraine cannot beat Russia. If the European countries banded together against Russia, sure, they could beat Russia. That's not the point. The point is we're specifically talking about Ukraine against Russia. No matter how much support Ukraine gets, if it's just their men, they're far outnumbered. We're not talking about all of Europe. That's actually an American point when you're talking about, because the Europeans fearmonger and say we need US support because Russia's going to take over all of us, which we all think is ridiculous considering their struggles to even get half of Ukraine. So that is a misrepresentation. We never said that Europe would be immediately defeated by Russia. I said Russia, it's not even impressive what they're doing, but we want to end the war. And if it's just Russia versus Ukraine in an isolated incident, then Russia would win 100 times out of 100. You're misrepresenting it. It's not, we didn't say that Europe against Russia. If it was Europe against Russia, Europe would have a good chance. Yeah, Europe would have a good chance. And that's what we thought. It's all the Europeans saying, no, we'd get trounced. We're so scared of Russia, we need US support. So see, this is not even correct what she's saying. She's misrepresenting our point to try and score her own. She is not articulating that situation correctly. Look at this. There's an emergency meeting now. They were really frazzled what happened with Vance and Trump, and these people, they understand that the United States is a different world here. This is not going to be some gravy train. This is not the Democrats where we say we hate ourselves and we'll give in and we'll give Europe whatever they want. It's a different story. We've got leaders now. When you're talking about these wars, Trump is standing up for the United States. Zelensky thought he could do the whole thing where it's like, you're going to feel it. It's going to be really bad for you once Russia takes over everything. And Trump shut him down. And now people are like, we are thankful the United States has a leader that will stand up for the country in a meaningful way. And that's exactly what Trump did. And so, yeah, we'll have to see what happens here. But what I can tell people when it comes to NATO and when it comes to the United Nations, Trump can get the United States out of NATO if he wanted to, I believe. There's going to be arguments on whether or not Congress is needed, but NATO is a very complicated situation. If you get out of it, Europe is more exposed. But are we really scared about Russia doing anything with, into Europe? Does that really... I know the whole idea of NATO being a deterrent, but obviously it goes a bit too far when you're talking about a defense agreement getting really aggressive in terms of expanding. And we'll have to see if the United States tries to do a bigger agreement with both China and Russia, because that's what I think Trump's going to end up possibly doing if he does get out of NATO. And it would be, I would still want to have relationships with the main powers like the UK, Italy, Germany, countries like that, Poland, but it's definitely a different situation if the United States left NATO and we're not tethered to that area. I know a lot of Republicans want it to happen, but I'm warning people it is a very, very complicated thing. And it could potentially help China. If the United States left NATO, you're talking about it helping Russia, you're talking about it helping China, but the idea would be the United States would be able to have a pact with both Russia and China. And hypothetically, it would not force us to be tied to regions that are far away from our home. And this is more of like a modern Republican stance where it's more isolationist, spend money on ourselves rather than on foreign wars. Trying to almost take away the East versus West type dynamic and the alienization of that. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.